Chapter 1. The Morning She Never Came Home, Amber Dubois. February 13, 2009, began like any other chilly winter morning in Escondido, California. The sun had yet to fully stretch across the quiet neighborhoods when 14-year-old Amber Leanne Dubois left her home. Clad in her school clothes, she carried a check from her father, a birthday gift to purchase a lamb through the Future Farmers of America program. Amber was a thoughtful and reserved teenager with a deep love for animals and fantasy novels. Her room was filled with books, stuffed animals, and drawings of imaginary creatures. She was excited about the FFA project. It was the kind of day she had been looking forward to for weeks. Amber lived with her mother, Carrie McGonigal, and stepfather in a modest home in Escondido. Her parents had divorced years earlier, but both remained involved in her life. That morning, nothing seemed out of place. She left with a sense of purpose, walking the familiar route to Escondido High School. The air was crisp and a light mist hung over the suburban streets. Neighbors who often saw her on her route later recalled seeing nothing out of the ordinary. But as the school day passed and Amber failed to check in with her friends or teachers, a quiet alarm began to ring in the hearts of those who loved her. She never arrived at school. Hours later, that concern turned into panic. Amber's parents contacted the police almost immediately. However, law enforcement initially classified her as a possible runaway. Amber was a teenager, and in their experience, teens sometimes left home over arguments or personal reasons. Her mother pushed back forcefully against that idea. Amber had no history of rebellion, no boyfriend, no signs of distress. She had a check in her hand for something she cared deeply about: raising a lamb. It made no sense that she would vanish voluntarily. The Escondido Police Department began their investigation but did not issue an Amber Alert, citing the lack of evidence of an abduction. This was a source of immense frustration for Amber's family and would later become a key criticism of how her case was handled. In the crucial early hours, every minute mattered, but the sense of urgency was lacking. Flyers were distributed across the city and news outlets were contacted, but without the weight of a formal alert system or national exposure, the case did not gain immediate traction. In response, Amber's family launched their own campaign. Carrie McGonigal printed thousands of missing posters and recruited neighbors and friends to plaster them across schools, shopping centers, libraries, and gas stations. Candlelight vigils were organized. Local businesses donated supplies for search parties. Carrie created a website dedicated to finding Amber, hoping to generate tips or witnesses. She appeared on local television and radio, pleading with the public to help find her daughter. Volunteers joined in droves, searching wooded areas, riversides, and remote trails in and around Escondido. Police did conduct some aerial searches and reviewed traffic cameras, but with so little to go on, they were essentially working blind. Several leads came in, from sightings in nearby towns to tips about strange individuals, but all ended in disappointment. Despite the vast effort, there was no sign of Amber. As the weeks turned into months, media outlets finally began picking up on the story, particularly as awareness of the family's struggle to receive timely help gained attention. National outlets occasionally mentioned the case, especially during anniversaries or coordinated search events. Celebrities and missing child organizations offered their platforms to spread Amber's story further. The emotional toll on her family was devastating. Carrie McGonigal described experiencing a waking nightmare. Every time the phone rang or there was a knock at the door, she feared it would bring either salvation or heartbreak. The birthdays, holidays, and back-to-school seasons that followed were excruciating. Her room was left untouched. Her clothes remained hanging in her closet. Her drawings stayed on the walls. Behind the scenes, local detectives and FBI agents quietly continued the investigation. One area of focus became the database of registered sex offenders in the vicinity. A few individuals were questioned, homes searched, and alibis checked, but no evidence emerged. Without a crime scene or physical clues, the case stalled. Yet authorities held hope that new technology or an unexpected break might one day revive their efforts. Meanwhile, Amber's family refused to accept silence. Carrie worked closely with other families of missing children, advocating for faster Amber Alert deployment and improved investigative procedures. She participated in marches, gave speeches, and developed educational materials for schools. What began as a desperate search for her own daughter became a larger mission to protect others from the same fate. Amber Dubois's disappearance left a deep scar on the Escondido community. Her name became familiar in households across California. Teachers used her story in school safety presentations. Parents held their children closer. Though she remained missing, Amber's spirit continued to influence change, pushing society to reconsider how it handles missing child cases. And then over a year later, news would break of another young girl gone missing nearby. It would be the horrifying discovery of Chelsea King's murder that would finally bring long-awaited answers in Amber's case, exposing the predator who had lurked among them all along. Chapter 2: The Day the Community Shattered, Chelsea King. On February 25, 2010, just over a year after Amber Dubois vanished, the San Diego suburb of Poway was thrown into chaos. Chelsea King, a 17-year-old high school senior, failed to return home after going for an afternoon run in Rancho Bernardo Community Park. The trail was popular and considered safe, winding through a picturesque landscape of eucalyptus trees and creeks. Chelsea, a driven and academically gifted student, had parked her car, locked her phone and wallet in the vehicle, and jogged off into the golden light of late afternoon. She was never seen again. Chelsea was an honor student, a talented cross-country runner, and beloved by teachers and classmates alike. Her sudden disappearance sent a jolt of fear through the community. This time police did not hesitate. Given her track record of responsibility and the suspicious nature of the scene, car abandoned, phone untouched, an urgent search began immediately. Within hours, helicopters hovered above the park, K-9 units swept through trails, and hundreds of volunteers poured in to help. By the next day, local and national news were covering the story. Billboards and alerts spread her image throughout the region. Unlike Amber's case, Chelsea's disappearance was treated from the start as a possible abduction. The community was reeling from déjà vu. Another bright, promising girl had vanished in the San Diego area, under eerily similar circumstances. For Amber's family, it was a haunting reminder. During the investigation, authorities uncovered critical surveillance footage near the park. Witnesses also came forward, describing a suspicious man seen loitering near the trail. The focus quickly turned to registered sex offenders in the area. DNA evidence recovered from clothing found near the park matched that of a man named John Albert Gardner III, a previously convicted sex offender who had served time for assaulting a teenage girl years earlier. Gardner, 30 years old at the time, had been released from prison in 2005 and was living in Lake Elsinore, though he frequented areas around Escondido and San Diego. He had failed to comply with many parole restrictions, but loopholes in monitoring and flawed systems allowed him to remain under the radar. Gardner was arrested on February 28, 2010. Under intense questioning and facing a mountain of forensic evidence, he eventually confessed not only to the murder of Chelsea King, but also to the abduction and murder of Amber Dubois. The confession shattered both families. After more than a year of torment, Amber's parents finally had answers, but not the ones they had hoped for. Gardner led authorities to a remote area in Paula, California, where Amber's skeletal remains were found. Her remains had been buried off a trail miles from where she was last seen. The location was desolate, wild, and heartbreaking. For the public, the realization that Gardner had been free, and capable of committing such heinous acts again, sparked outrage. Protests erupted, and there were renewed calls for changes in how violent sex offenders were supervised. The community mourned the loss of 2 innocent lives and reckoned with a justice system that had failed to prevent this predator's second rampage. Chelsea's and Amber's families, though devastated, united in grief and advocacy. Their stories became intertwined, not just by tragedy, but by their joint efforts to ensure no other family would endure the same pain. Together, they pushed for the passage of Chelsea's Law, which aimed to increase penalties and monitoring of violent sexual predators. Within months, the bill passed unanimously in the California legislature. The discovery of Chelsea King's murder brought Amber Dubois's case to a tragic close. But from their ashes rose a movement, a demand for better protection of children, more oversight and accountability for those tasked with tracking the most dangerous offenders. Though the pain would never disappear, the determination to make lasting change gave purpose to unbearable loss. What began as 2 separate nightmares became a shared mission. The lives of Amber and Chelsea would not be defined by the evil that took them, but by the legacy of awareness, reform, and strength that their families forged in their memory. Chapter 3. A Predator Unmasked. John Albert Gardner III. John Albert Gardner III was not an unknown figure in the eyes of law enforcement. Born in 1979 and raised in Southern California, Gardner had a documented history of violent and predatory behavior. Diagnosed with ADHD and borderline personality disorder as a teenager, he struggled through school and was in and out of mental health facilities. At the age of 21, Gardner was convicted of molesting a 13-year-old girl. He served 5 years in prison and was released in 2005. Gardner's release came with restrictions. He was required to register as a sex offender, adhere to curfews, and attend therapy sessions. However, California's parole system at the time lacked the resources and oversight to properly enforce these conditions. Gardner frequently violated his parole by venturing into restricted areas, including near schools and parks. Despite repeated reports from neighbors and parole officers, little was done to contain him. He moved between residences, used multiple aliases online, and spent hours on violent pornography and predator forums. In the years between his release and his eventual arrest, Gardner lived a double life. To his mother and acquaintances, he was a man trying to rebuild, working odd jobs and attending therapy. But in reality, he was spiraling deeper into fantasy and obsession. GPS records and cell tower pings would later show that he had stalked trails and schools in the region, watching potential victims. The attack on Chelsea King was not spontaneous. It was calculated, deliberate, and disturbingly familiar. When Gardner was arrested in connection with Chelsea's disappearance, police seized his electronic devices. Forensic analysis uncovered disturbing evidence, including searches related to abducting and hiding bodies. He had even scouted Paula, the site where Amber Dubois was later found. During interrogation, Gardner coldly described his actions, showing little remorse. He pleaded guilty to both murders to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Chapter 4. Ripples of Grief and Change. The aftermath of the crimes committed by Gardner was profound. Chelsea King's and Amber Dubois's murders not only devastated two families but also exposed fatal flaws in California's approach to supervising violent offenders. Public anger transformed into activism. Within months, Chelsea's law was enacted. The legislation imposed mandatory life sentences for certain violent sex crimes against minors, strengthened parole conditions, and created safety zones around schools and parks. The law became a model for other states. Meanwhile, Carrie McGonigal and Brent and Kelly King, Chelsea's parents, became national advocates for missing and exploited children. They spoke before Congress, consulted with law enforcement agencies, and founded organizations like Chelsea's Light Foundation to promote child safety. The community, though shaken, also rallied. Vigils, charity runs, scholarships, and memorials were organized. Amber and Chelsea became symbols, not of victimhood, but of strength and change. Their names were etched into the heart of California's collective consciousness. Their stories were taught in schools. Their families turned agony into impact. And though justice had been served, the haunting truth remained. Had the system acted sooner, both girls might still be alive. It was a sobering realization that policy alone is not enough. Vigilance, communication, and a societal shift in how predators are managed is essential. The legacy of Amber Dubois and Chelsea King lives on in the lives they touched, the laws they inspired, and the families that refused to let their daughters be forgotten. Chapter 5. The Courtroom Reckoning. On April 16, 2010, the San Diego Superior Courtroom brimmed with silence so taut it felt like a held breath. Every seat was filled, reporters clutching notepads, law enforcement officers flanking the walls, and the anguished families of Amber Dubois and Chelsea King seated in the front rows, faces hardened by grief yet softened by trembling hope for justice. On this day, John Albert Gardner III, the man who had stolen their daughters, would face formal sentencing. Gardner shuffled in wearing a county-issued navy blue jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles, flanked by deputies. He looked straight ahead with an expression devoid of emotion, refusing to make eye contact with the families of the girls whose lives he had so violently extinguished. He had already confessed to the murders of both Amber and Chelsea as part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Now he was to receive life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As part of the sentencing process, the families were given the opportunity to address the court. Their words painted portraits of two radiant young lives extinguished far too soon. Carrie McGonigal, Amber's mother, stood first. She spoke through tears, describing Amber's love of animals, her plans to become a veterinarian, and the way she lit up their home with her quiet presence. "I have been sentenced too," Carrie said softly, "to a life without my daughter." Next, Chelsea King's parents took the floor. Kelly King described Chelsea's brilliance, her talent for piano, her love for cross-country running, and her indomitable spirit. Brent King choked back tears as he recalled bedtime lullabies, family hikes, and Chelsea's ability to make everyone feel valued. He looked directly at Gardner and asked the question that would haunt him forever. Why? The judge, while delivering the sentence, did not mince words. He called Gardner a monster hiding in plain sight, a predator whose actions were among the most depraved the court had seen. He condemned the missed warnings and systemic lapses that had failed to prevent Gardner's rampage, highlighting prior parole violations and his documented history of violent behavior. The court learned that Gardner had violated the terms of his parole multiple times, often without consequence. Psychological evaluations had flagged him as high risk, yet he remained largely unsupervised. The facts were grim. Gardner had stalked his victims, choosing isolated moments to strike, coldly, efficiently, without remorse. The prosecution presented additional disturbing evidence, including attempts to abduct other young girls that had gone previously unreported or under-investigated. Each new detail painted a chilling portrait of a man who had long posed a threat but slipped through the cracks of a system meant to protect the public. The sentence, life in prison without parole, was the most severe possible under the plea agreement. The courtroom remained hushed even as it was handed down, the weight of justice tempered by the irreversible loss. Gardner was led away, unresponsive, his eyes never once turning toward the anguished cries behind him. Outside the courthouse, a spontaneous vigil formed. Mourners gathered holding candles, posters with Amber and Chelsea's faces, and signs demanding reform. Media cameras rolled as the King and McGonigal families emerged to address the crowd. Kelly King, voice resolute, declared, "We cannot undo what's been done, but we can prevent it from happening again." Carrie added, "This isn't just about Amber and Chelsea. This is about all our children." Their pain was raw, but their resolve was steel. Though justice had been served in legal terms, the courtroom reckoning was only the beginning of a larger battle, one that would extend beyond the courthouse steps and into legislative chambers across the nation. Chapter 6. Unfinished Echoes. Even as the courtroom lights dimmed and the cameras were packed away, the reverberations of Gardner's crimes continued to echo through California and beyond. For the Dubois and King families, the sentencing marked the end of one chapter but the beginning of another. A lifelong journey of healing, remembrance, and fierce advocacy. Carrie McGonigal found solace not in stillness but in action. With a fierce determination born of unimaginable grief, she founded Team Amber, a non-profit organization focused on empowering young people with self-defense training, safety education, and digital awareness. Carrie began traveling to schools, community centers, and law enforcement agencies, often accompanied by photos of Amber and slideshows of missing children. Her presentations were gut-wrenching but powerful, driving home the message that awareness could save lives. At the same time, Brent and Kelly King launched the Chelsea's Light Foundation, channeling their sorrow into systemic change. Their organization spearheaded one of the most significant legislative responses to violent crime in California's recent history, Chelsea's Law. Passed in September 2010 with bipartisan support, the law mandated life sentences for certain violent sexual offenses against minors, expanded the use of GPS monitoring for high-risk parolees, and improved communication between law enforcement agencies regarding offender behavior. The law's passage was both cathartic and bittersweet. The Kings sat beside Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger as he signed the bill into law, flanked by rows of supporters wearing orange and blue, Chelsea's favorite colors. "We cannot bring our daughter back," Brent said at the signing, "but with this law we can stop the next child from becoming a victim." Chelsea's Law inspired similar legislation in other states, and the foundation's policy blueprint became a national model. But legislative change was only part of the journey. Grief does not follow linear paths. Every birthday passed without Amber or Chelsea was another reminder of the futures stolen. Empty chairs at family dinners. the sound of laughter missing from old vacation videos. The ghosts of possibilities hung heavy in the rooms they once occupied. Amber's room remained untouched for years, filled with animal figurines, fantasy books, and handwritten notes. Chelsea's piano sat silent, its keys collecting dust. Both families turned those memories into momentum. Annual memorial runs, candlelight vigils, and community safety fairs became rituals of remembrance and renewal. Volunteers, many of whom had helped search for the girls, returned year after year. Survivors of sexual assault came forward during these events, often moved by the courage of the families to break silence. Together they formed a movement not built solely on tragedy, but on transformation. Meanwhile, John Gardner was transferred to a maximum security prison, where he remained in solitary confinement for his own protection, reviled by both inmates and society at large. News reports occasionally surfaced of his attempts to appeal small aspects of his confinement, but they were met with universal disdain. His existence faded into obscurity, an afterthought to a public far more invested in the legacies of his victims. Chapter 7. Legacy etched in light. As the years passed, the stories of Amber Dubois and Chelsea King became more than just footnotes in true crime documentaries. They became movements, memories, and motivation. In classrooms, teachers shared their stories during safety lessons. In legislative chambers, their names were cited during arguments for stronger protections. In households, parents used their memories as reminders to foster open conversations about safety, trust, and vigilance. Carrie McGonigal and the Kings remained tireless advocates. Their presence at public events continued to draw attention, not just because of their personal losses, but because of the strength they displayed in transforming that loss into meaningful change. They became symbols not of tragedy but of tenacity. Mothers and fathers from around the country reached out to them, seeking guidance, offering solidarity, and forming a web of voices united in the name of child safety. The work of their foundations expanded beyond expectations. Team Amber partnered with local police departments to offer child safety workshops, while Chelsea's Light Foundation collaborated with lawmakers to create a nationwide offender registry that focused on transparency and prevention. These initiatives were powered not by government grants alone, but by communities rallying behind the cause. Art installations, murals, and scholarship funds were created in the girls' names. The parks where they once played now bore plaques with their faces, accompanied by quotes that reflected their hope and warmth. Annual remembrance events included not only vigils but community projects, tree plantings, food drives, and donation campaigns, all serving as living memorials to the girls' spirits. Chapter 8. A vigil that never ends. Even today, the stories of Amber Dubois and Chelsea King remain active threads in the tapestry of California's social consciousness. They serve as somber cautionary tales, yes, but also as fierce calls to action. Their names are etched not just in granite or legislature, but in the hearts of those who remember them and those who never knew them yet carry their legacy. The fight continues. Each year brings new challenges, new families facing similar horror, new discussions around justice and reform. But with every life saved, every parent educated, and every child empowered, the echo of Amber and Chelsea grows stronger. They are not forgotten. They are the light that remains after the darkness. They are the reason many now walk more carefully, speak more openly, and fight more passionately. In that way, Amber Dubois and Chelsea King will never be truly gone. Chapter 9. Lessons written in law. Chelsea's law, passed in 2010, marked a pivotal moment in how California approached sex offenders and violent crimes against minors. The law imposed life sentences without parole for violent sexual offenses against children and extended parole restrictions for offenders. This legislation was born not just from political will, but from the raw grief and relentless drive of Chelsea's parents, Brent and Kelly King. They met with lawmakers, appeared before state committees, and gathered public support that left little room for opposition. The law became a template discussed nationwide, though implementation in other states proved inconsistent. Meanwhile, Amber's case directly contributed to reform in the Amber Alert system. Criticism over the delay in issuing an alert when Amber vanished triggered statewide evaluations. Revisions were enacted to remove ambiguous criteria and ensure rapid dissemination of alerts when a child's safety was in serious doubt. The emotional testimonies from Carrie McGonigal brought clarity to the failures and prompted tangible improvements in how future cases would be treated. These legal victories, while significant, did not lessen the pain. But they did offer a form of resolution, a belief that their daughters' lives had influenced a safer world. The names Amber and Chelsea became forever associated with protective legislation, a rare form of immortality through justice. Chapter 10. Echoes Across America. The cases of Amber Dubois and Chelsea King became more than headlines. They became benchmarks by which new disappearances were judged. Their families' advocacy transformed public expectations. News stations covering other missing children would mention Amber and Chelsea, invoking their stories to remind audiences what was at stake. Organizations dedicated to missing and exploited children adopted new models inspired by the girls' cases. Training materials, search protocols, and public alert systems were refined. Schools and communities increased investment in student safety and mental health. The ripple effects were vast. Families in crisis reached out to Carrie and the Kings, finding comfort in shared experience and guidance in their pain. Their support groups grew into nationwide networks. Conferences and summits began featuring panels with families like theirs, turning their grief into expertise, their despair into empowerment. Though they could never return to the lives they had before February 13, 2009 or February 25, 2010, these families forged new identities from the ashes of tragedy, as advocates, educators, and defenders of every child's right to safety. Chapter 11. The Unseen Guardians. In quiet moments across the country, there are people walking wooded trails or glancing at playgrounds with sharper eyes because of Amber and Chelsea. Law enforcement officers study their cases in training seminars. Parents set curfews or install safety apps on phones. Teachers monitor student behavior a little more carefully. Their influence lingers like a watchful presence. Though the two girls never met in life, their spirits now seem intertwined in how they shaped the future. Memorial runs, scholarship awards, park dedications, all stand as testaments to lives that ended far too soon, but whose purpose somehow continued. Amber and Chelsea are remembered not only for the horror that took them but for the hope they left behind. In their names, strangers became family, pain became purpose, and silence became advocacy. They remain in every sense of the word guardians, unseen but never unfelt.